All right, hello everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Albi, senior 2 student at Appleby. I'm going to be graduating in a few weeks. So this last year I've been working on a global action plan, and the mandate of this global action plan is to improve the quality of primary education in rural highland Peru. So don't worry about it. I'll just start over.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. Don't worry. But yes, the mandate of this global action plan is to improve the quality of primary education in rural highland Peru. We can often see that in the world today, we can see that rural areas, because of their lack of infrastructure and a multitude of other reasons, are having trouble actually accessing proper education as compared to urban areas or more developed countries. So I want to start off today by giving you this set of images, and this set of images is going to tell a story. Now, you're going to notice the first image here is an Albanian flag. The reason I have this here is because I was born in Albania, but more importantly, my parents were raised when they were my age in a communist Albania. It was a fascist society for much of the time that they were growing up, for much of the time that they received their education. So education to them was really hard to come by, and so every single year they took, every single day they took was really highly valued to them. It was back in a time where you didn't get to choose what university you went to. The government sort of just assigned it right off the bat, so unless you had connections, unless you knew people, you weren't going to necessarily have the opportunity to develop. So because of this background, they've instilled within me that education is just such an important thing, and you can't take it for granted. Education is what opens doors for opportunity in life, for opportunity to make a living for yourself, but for others as well, and the opportunity to make a change in the world. And they've always told me, because of that background, to never take education for granted. Second picture here is from my service trip when I was in Peru. Now, I'd never actually been to South America before this service trip, so I at first went to Peru just to get an idea of, what South American culture was like. But when I actually went there, I was really shocked for the first time to see. Now, I've always heard stories about how, people over there are going to be disadvantaged in terms of education because they're a developing country, because of factors of being in a rural society. This was my very first time actually seeing it firsthand. And I was quite appalled and taken aback at how so many people can be deprived of being able to have an education, of being able to have just the sole opportunity to open a door and to make a living for themselves, make a change in the world. And that was something that really struck me inside. This third picture is of me at a recent debate public speaking tournament. And I need to really, and I put this on here because I really accredit my involvement in debate and public speaking as making me an advocate for social change. It's made me very aware of events that are going on in the world. It's made me very aware of the ability that somebody speaking about issues in the world can really have. And I think that's part of what drove me to actually consider this global action plan in tandem with my trip to Peru and my background. And this last picture represents the future. That is a picture of Western University's campus. That is where I'm going to be heading next year, and as I'm going to be spending my next 4 years there, this is going to be where the bulk of my action plan is going to be carried out from. So we're going to go into a little more about the background of education in Peru, why rural education is in such a bad state it was now. And I got two more pictures here that tell a story. This here is Machu Picchu, one of Peru's most famous landmarks. And over here I've got a picture of Francisco Pizarro. So the Machu Picchu picture here is representative of the Incan Society. The Incan Society is the native society, or the indigenous peoples that lived in Peru at the time. They were living there, and they had actually quite a developed society for their time period and for an indigenous peoples at the time, until the Spanish came along, led by this man, Francisco Pizarro, and then we have a classic case of colonialism where the Europeans came in, and we saw just mass genocide, mass discrimination, mass segregation happening with the indigenous communities there. So unless you were Spanish, you were either killed off, or if you survived, you were cast aside into other parts of society that were not as advantaged. You were not given the same opportunity as the European majority that had migrated there. You were not given a right. You were not given human rights, essentially, which was terrible. Now, we'd like to say that we've made progress since then, and I guess in some regards we have, but at the end of the day, these impacts are still being felt. Because if you look at the majority of people in these rural areas who are not receiving proper educations, it's indigenous peoples, the Quechua people who still live in these rural areas in the Sacred Valley, which were once populated by the Incan population. It's the same thing going on again, it's just more hidden in the eyes of the world because we're in the modern day. So the next thing I need to do was research a little bit about the current situation there. And over here, I've actually got some statistics from the graduating, from the second year of secondary school in Peru. So this is the stage that this is the stage that students are at when they're graduating or when they're close to graduating in Peru. So this is a great summary of what their education actually accumulates in. This is from the 2016 ECE. The ECE in Peru is a standardized test. So as we might have EQAO, for example, to see how we're doing in the education system, Peruvians would have the ECE. So the one I really want to draw attention to here is the area of Cusco. Kind of small, but you can't read it here. Area of Cusco the area of Cusco, the province of Cusco, contains the village of Oro, which is where I went for my own service trip. Now, obviously, it's really tough to interpret the data from a giant chart like this. So, to make it easier, I've broken it down into a bit more of an infographic here. So, we have language and we have mathematics that we need to pay attention to here. These are the two big areas that are tested by the ECE. In the second year of primary school is when the first time that a student would be taking the ECE. 50.9% of urban students pass the ECE, which is not a pretty number to begin with. Then we go to rural areas, and we're dropping to 16.5%. In math, 36.6% urban areas, once again, not a pretty number, drops to 17.3% in rural areas, which is disastrous. So eventually we move on, and the average years of education for a Peruvian student nowadays is 9 years. Why is it 9 years as opposed to the 12 offered by the Peruvian curriculum? Well, it's 9 years because eventually these students need to drop out to support their families, whether it be on the farm or other sorts of work, because the average income for a Peruvian is $5,580. The average Peruvian is making much, much less below the poverty line in Canada, which is an issue that needs to be dealt with. So by the time we actually get to secondary school, by the time they're taking that last ECE, so we get an idea of where they stand in the country, rural students, only 2.5% of them are passing language, 2% are passing math. 2 in every 100. Now, there's an alternative solution for students who actually have the opportunity to get an education. We can see that private schools such as Markham College are more than willing to offer admission to students in order to, help them to pass. If you can chalk up $17,500 a year, which we've just established is not feasible. In addition, a lot of Peruvian independent schools, how they operate is on a family basis. So they'll prioritize students of families that have already attended there in the past. So it's not only a question of money, it's also got to be, has your family contributed to the school in the past? And it's downright said on their admissions page that this is something that they will prioritize. So it's hard for even people of new wealth to break into the education system in a way in which that their children can actually receive a proper education. Which brings me to the Global Action Plan. So after analyzing everything that we've seen here, I made it my Global Action Plan to increase the quality of education in rural highland Peru through 3 specific goals. Number 1, raising funds in order to stock up these schools, primary schools primarily, in order to get them the necessary supplies that they'd actually need to run proper lessons, to run proper classes. Number 2, developing a standardized curriculum for teachers to be able to use in rural classrooms. With rural classrooms being extremely unorganized. Many of them aren't even legitimate classrooms. They're local moms taking care of children and trying to teach them things here or there. Having a standardized curriculum helps alleviate some of the stress on the moms on how to try to teach what to teach these children. It gives us a standardized curriculum to help students pass the ECE, to help students try to follow along on the same level as expected of them. And number 3, training teachers in rural areas to give an effective education. One of the issues is that, teachers, many of them, like I just said, being just moms in the community trying to take care of children, don't actually have proper training. Many teachers in Peru do not have proper training, and therefore it's essential that in order to just teach the kids the content they need, that the teachers have to be educated in how to teach them. Because if it doesn't matter how hard the kid works, if the teacher cannot provide the necessary information, then there's nothing from the source that's letting them succeed or get this opportunity of education. Which leads us to a 5-year plan here. So year 1, currently this year, grade 12 at Albi College. So this year was mostly just about fleshing out the plan, what I needed to do moving forward, trying to build connections with agencies such as Projects Abroad, which I'm going to be working closely with. Projects Abroad, by the way, is the organization that the school works with for the service trip that we take to Peru. It was for last year, which was the first time we went with them, and then this year as well. Mr. Skembri was actually on that trip. But yeah, so Projects Abroad is who I'm working with. I've actually gotten in touch with some of their office through live chat, and I've also connected with Hugo Siancas, who was one of the guides for my trip and the trip that went this year, and he's really associated with some of the Peruvian communities over there, so I've really had him as a contact. Another person I made contact with this year is a man by the name of Tim DeWinter. Tim DeWinter was a former head of Projects Abroad. He now works with a separate organization, but he's doing a lot of on-the-ground work, and he's really helping these Peruvian communities for education in terms of just trying to develop their economic income a little more. He's been working with these communities hands-on with it, which is huge input for me, because I'll be able to have someone to tell me what actually needs to happen, who's on the ground there, so I'm not just making assumptions based on me here living in Canada trying to make calls on Peru. I actually have someone on the ground who's telling me what's up. So Tim is a very valuable resource. So this first year has just all been fleshing out the plan and creating connections which are going to prove invaluable later on. So year 2, I'm going to be at Western. This is the year that I want to be developing a curriculum to be used by rural classrooms in Peru. And because I'm finally at Western, I also want to see if I can begin hosting a charity night there. So this is my primary source of funds for buying the necessary supplies that are going to be needed for these schools. I'm particularly looking at the Unicef School in a Box, which we're going to be seeing a little later. And what I want to be doing here is this is going to be the year where things really start taking off. I want to get funds, and I want to actually start making this curriculum. Now, obviously, I'm not the most qualified in terms of making curriculum. I'm not a teacher. I don't necessarily have teaching experience. So that's why it's going to be essential to talk to teachers that I've had in the past, talk to people who actually know how to make a curriculum. So talking to them, getting their input, and as well as looking at the Peruvian side of things, talking to people who are on the ground, working with these teachers, talking to the people on the ground, asking them what these students actually need in the curriculum. And it's taking input from all these sides and coming up with a template, getting it looked over by these same people again, because they're the ones with the expertise. I'm just trying to figure out a way to mold it into a plan that can be used based on that expertise. Year 3, we're going to attempt to actually implement the curriculum in the village of Oiro in Peru. Obviously, I can't tackle the entire country at once. It's just a tad little bit unrealistic as much as I'd like to do that. So we're going to be looking to implement the curriculum in Peru. And I plan to do this because this is also a year where I want to return back to Peru on a service trip, either on my own or with Projects Abroad, dependent on how those connections sustain themselves throughout those years. And hopefully I'll be able to go back there, and with the connections that I've established, with the people that I've connected with, I can go in there and start trying to implement this curriculum so we can actually start seeing some stuff done. And by then, I also want to learn some basic Spanish, just because it's good for me to be able to communicate with the communities there on a local level, because it really provides more of a connection that makes it seem like I'm less of an outsider trying to trying to implement or my own ideologies or trying to assimilate my own ideologies over them. This makes it more like this is my effort to try to understand them, to try to help them, rather than me just trying to make a call for them. I think learning Spanish, yes, it's a new language, but I've already had experience with learning French, which is a pretty similar language. So I'm certified fluent in French. I know 2 other languages as well in terms of Albanian and obviously English, and I'm basic conversationalist in Mandarin Chinese, so learning languages isn't too new to me, so it's something that I'd be willing to do, and I think it's something that's going to prove very vital for this plan, and something that I'd really look forward to doing. Year 4, we're going to communicate with Projects Abroad to develop a program to actually train the teachers. So Projects Abroad has obviously been doing this for much longer than I have, so it's about communicating with them, asking what they need, and seeing how I can input my own and seeing if these ideas would actually work. So it's once again talking with people who are more qualified than me and trying to take those ideas and see what creative spins I can put on it. What is something new that we might not have tried that with the expertise of these people we can actually implement. And by now I want to be able to completely gather enough funds to support every school in Oiro, which I believe there are 4 or 5 of. So this would require a bunch of school-in-a-box kits, which I said we're going to cover a little later, but this is the year that I really want to start making sure that I've got the funds necessary to support these schools for a long period of time. Year 5, in the last year of this Global Action Plan, I want to return to Peru once more with Projects Abroad or whoever I'm working with at that point to actually implement the teacher training program, and I want to be involved a little bit in it, just see how it would work out. And I want to be able to just see the fruits of what has happened in the last 5 years. I want to be able to see there and see the impacts of what has happened and maybe just kind of reflect on what else needed to be done. Because beyond these 5 years, this could be a longer project, this could just be a 5-year project, but it's about, at that point, looking at what we've done so far in the community and deciding what would be best moving forward for that community as well. Because at the end of the day, I want to be able to help that community. I want to be able to really make a difference and a change in that community, offering them the opportunity of education, which cannot be overstated at all in today's world. So it's about going there and reflecting. Now, something that I promised to talk about is the Unicef School in a Box. So a school in a box is $270. You can order it from the UNICEF website, and it includes 40 educational toolkits for individual students, as well as just materials for classrooms as a whole in general. So like the globe here, I don't think every student would be getting a globe, you just kind of get like one for the classroom. But it's essentially whatever you would need to run a school for 40 students. Considering that these classrooms in Oiro would be much, much smaller, because like I said, it's just local moms taking care of a few kids. This is great because it actually means that you're going to have more materials split among a smaller group of students, which means this school kid would essentially be able to last them a longer time as well. So you're getting much more value out of the investment here. So $270, and I'd say on a decent fundraiser night for a university campus, you can maybe raise $1,000. So, you know, it's definitely a feasible idea to try to fundraise to get multiple schools in a box. School in a boxes. I don't know how you say that in plural, but yes, this is how you would actually, this would be my primary way of ensuring that these schools would actually receive the supplies necessary. Because at the end of the day, what we want to achieve is just an environment where kids can get the opportunity to get an education. Because education these days opens so many doors. It opens the door to make yourself a living. It opens the door to change. It opens the door to so many paths in life. And I think whatever somebody decides to do with that opportunity is completely up to them. But at the end of the day, you need to offer them that opportunity. At the end of the day, we all deserve as human beings to be able to have a chance to open that door. Because because we can make the most of what we get out of our lives, but if we're not given the chance to even make anything out of it, if we're not given the primary resources needed to build something out of our lives, then where can we really go? This was my Global Action Plan. I really hope you enjoyed this panel presentations, and I'd like to open the floor to questions.
Thank Thank you, Albi. And yes, we'll take probably 10 minutes now to ask Albi a series of questions. If there's anyone on the panel who would like to jump in first, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
I made the first sound. So, just wondering, so next year would be when you're starting to raise funds and doing these
Yes.
sort of fundraiser nights. Do you have any ideas right now about what you would do for those?
It's funny you say that because I actually had an idea that I tried to implement this year just at Appleby. Unfortunately, the proposal got rejected due to logistics not lining up properly with dates and stuff being a little late in the year. But I tried to propose a charity night where I envisioned people kind of just coming in and sort of performing just to get kind of like a coffee house feel going on. So you maybe pay for admission. I think we'd offer different kinds of tea. And I go with tea because Peru is very well known for two things, coffee and tea. So it could be either. I'm just going to offer some coffee and tea from native Peru, so that supports the local community as well. And just being able to people just to get a taste of Peruvian culture. It would be very similar to if you were here before, 4 years ago, Dignitas had that Coffee for Cause night. So I was kind of looking for a similar vibe to that. And I kind of just want to have a charity night where people come in, perform. We've got the entire cafe feel going on. People may just pay for admission, and if they want to make an additional donation, that would be fine. But it's just about spreading awareness within that community, and it's about getting people together for a cause. So that's how I'd envision maybe a charity night to be there, like at a cafe venue sort of thing.
In terms of your relationship with projects abroad, if that were to become shaky or you weren't getting consistent communication with them, do you have a backup plan as to how you might proceed without their support?
That's the beauty of both talking with Projects Abroad and Tim DeWinter, because I think should one of those relationships fall through, I always have the other one. Like I said, Tim used to work for Projects Abroad. He's affiliated with a completely different organization now. So I think it's great to have kind of two assets, to say, that I can communicate with, because like I said, if one falls through, I've always got the other. If things were to fall through with both of them, I've done some research on other grassroots organization in the area. I think one of them was Blue Sparrow. I can't recall the names of the other two right now. I didn't contact them initially just because I didn't feel like they were offering what I necessarily needed in terms of education. They were more focused on agricultural development in order for rural communities there just to increase their income. So that families could just make a living there. But if worst comes to worst, I can completely see myself contacting these organizations just in case.
I'm just wondering how things are progressing with Projects Abroad so far. Have you spoken with Hugo much about kind of, like, has he gone through this whole plan with you? Have you gone through everything with him, or?
I've given him just a general outline of the plan. He's definitely interested. We're communicating now, actually. I was communicating about how I would try to get funds to Peru. And he was the one who actually gave me the recommendation that when you receive the funds, go to the Projects Abroad office in Toronto, explain to them the entire situation. We'll get in touch with them as well. And so what's going to happen is that when I actually have my funds, I'm going to give them to the Projects Abroad Toronto office. They're going to send it to the Projects Abroad Peru office, and they're going to use the funds dependent on what we deem them to be useful for. Because it's more price efficient that way, considering shipping taxes and all that. Just a lot easier to spend the money, buy the things there. And yeah, so Hugo's already been, to answer your question, I have been in touch with Hugo. He's been a massive help so far in trying to plan out the logistics of this plan. So yes, I've been keeping in touch with him.
Great.
Albi, next year you're at Western.
Yes.
What are you studying?
I'm doing social science for my first 2 years there, and I say first 2 years because third year I have AEO into the Ivy School of Business. So yeah, hopefully get to maintain that 80 average to stay in there. That's what I'm counting on. But yes, so I'm going to be doing social science, which I think ties in nicely to what this plan consists of. This is about like social advocacy and looking for social change. So I think that ties in nicely. And then I can see my time at Ivy also being very beneficial, just because having that business mindset is also going to help me figure out ways to be more profitable with the charity in a sense, or just the fundraising, I should say, in order to get more money to send over to Peru.
So as you're at Western next year, you'd be obviously removed at that point by a year and a half since you were actually in Peru. Mm-hmm. This year you've been very focused on this as your global action plan. You've had a whole course where you've been focused on this one idea. I think in your 5-year timeline, you talked about in year 3, so
Year
2
3 and
years
year
from
5,
now,
yeah.
when you would head back there. There's a pretty big gap right now in terms of your connection to Peru. What will help to keep you grounded in this global action plan, keep you connected to the community of Oiro, and keep you passionate about this idea over the next couple of years?
Number one, constant communication with the people that I have on the ground there, because they're the ones who are experiencing this sort of situation every day. They're the ones who know what the issues are, so keeping constant communication with them is going to be crucial in order to keep myself involved in this plan. It's not even just about whether I'd be passionate about that plan at that point. It's about, knowing what's happening on the ground there so I can sustain my connection with the situation there. Because like I've stated multiple times, I want to avoid this idea where it's just another Westerner coming in, implementing their own ideology. I want to avoid that. I want to listen to the communities there and understand what they want. So number one, that communication is going to be vital. Number two, I think just always looking back to kind of my background and why I think education is so important, and just always remembering that I think education is an opportunity that needs to be afforded to everyone. And because of the experience that I've had in the past, I'm not one to just kind of let things sit there. I'm one to really go out there and make change. So I do believe that I have the focus within myself just to keep pursuing this action plan and to just keep working towards this goal as long as I've got constant communication, as long as I remember, my own values and what I'm applying these values for.
Great. A suggestion for you around that, I think you should think of yourself in your position as an Appleby alumnus when you graduate from here, and in terms of the connections you have with students who went to Peru, but those connections that you're maintaining with your alumni base and the current base of students here at the school, and think of ways that you can actually engage them and help them to connect you also, or reconnect you to what your passion is. Second thought there is around your new community that you're going to be at in Western. Yes, there will be a number of alumni from here that you'll have in years above you in your same year as well, but thinking of ways that you can engage them, not just through your charity events, but more deeply in what you're actually pursuing. When you go in 2 years' time, is there a way to actually get a group of people to be going, for instance, and then sort of have that team that you're connected to and connected with to what your project is?
Thank you.
In terms of the program and this course you've taken and creating this plan, what's been the most challenging part of this year for you?
I have to say reaching out to contacts for the first time was one of the biggest challenges for me. I think what many of us actually in the course, and not just myself, but I think what many of us in this course agreed upon is that as someone who's trying to make change, I think one of the things that we want to be able to do is to control as much as possible, because that way we know things are under our jurisdiction and responsibility and we can ensure stuff gets done. So it's intimidating for the first time when you reach out to someone because you don't know how they're going to react. You could be super polite, you could offer the best idea in the world. At the end of the day, if they don't like it, they don't like it, or if they just don't respond to you, they don't respond to you. And it's an intimidating thing. And I remember I had to, reach out to Hugo, 2 or 3 times before he actually responded. That was less because of him and more because he actually had projects at the time and didn't have actually any internet access. But I remember being kind of slightly discouraged at that point. I was like, oh God, do I keep going or do I not? But I think it's perseverance is super important to have in that. And actually, Tim DeWinter was really tough to get a hold of because he didn't actually work with projects abroad. No one actually had direct access to his email in a sense. So I tried contacting the Projects Abroad head office via the live chat that they have available on their website. See if do you know Tim DeWinter? I know he was a former head here, but do you have any contact information I could reach him with? I understand he doesn't work here. Could you get me in contact with him? Said no, so I had to start digging around, and then eventually Hugo pointed me towards his Facebook page. And I didn't know how useful that was going to be, but I went on to his Facebook page, and then he had his email somewhere there. And I managed to email him, and then I think a week later he replied, and then I was like, oh my goodness, yes, because I think Tim de Winter has probably been one of the most vital people I've kept in contact with. The ECE information that I got, the entire Peruvian census, is actually not a public document. It's very, for the first, I think, 2 or 3 years after the census happens, it's not available to the public until I think the next ECE happens. So being able, because Tim de Winter actually had ties within the Ministry of Education in Peru, he had access to that document, and as such, he was able to grant access to that document to me as well. So that was just having someone with those connections and that ability to help my action plan at that stage was a massive, massive, massive asset for me. So.
Thank you.
Any final questions? No? All right, Albi, thank you very much for your presentation today. We wish you all the best. To the panel, thank you very much for your time and your questions. And yeah, good job, Albi.
I got my silver Duke of Ed as well, so I'm actually getting the diploma.
Will you have that presented tomorrow?
I'm not actually attending the presentation because I've got a class that period, and it's the one class I have a summative left for.
Oh, there you go.